I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. Our guest expert today is Gus Castro. Gus, welcome to our show. Thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to have a great conversation about generating leads through the ISA process, or the inside sales team or associate, or however you want to categorize it. But inside sales lead to outside sales, and it's a topic matter that I've actually covered quite extensively within our own brokerage, but then also a group of people that I mastermind with on an annual basis that are all part of this Realtor Magazine 30 Under 30 award. There's a lot of people that talk about ISAs and do's and don'ts and how you do it. And you've grown one of the largest inside sales teams for real estate in North America, 65 agents making about 50,000 outbound dials a day. How does that happen, Gus? How do you do that?
Well, actually, that's a little bit out of date. And, as of today, this morning, we have over 100 full-time folks working for us. And it's pretty wild. You start small. I didn't start at 100 people. I kind of grew into it, and you have to have a model that works. If you have a model that works, you can scale up a business, right? The same way that real estate team works.
So the model is the key, of course, because if you've got people that are making calls for the person who's actually going to be on site, out in the field, you want to make sure that they're saying something consistent. You want to make sure that it's authentic. It generates a conversation. And so could we go through either the script or the training process that you have your ISAs go through? Because this could just be great information for an individual agent that just wants to perfect their presentation
Absolutely.
with someone on the phone or in person. It could also be someone that's feeling like, man, they're just taxed from a appointment standpoint, and they feel like they need some help, but they don't need help when they're on site. They need help generating leads. So what are the things that you share with your ISAs, and how do you train them to have good, authentic conversations with people over the phone that then create appointments?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I always tell folks that are interested in the ISA model, but they're solo agents. They don't have a team yet. I always tell them, ISA is not the first hire you bring on your team, but ISA is a role, right? So the same way the agent is the transaction coordinator and they're the admin and they're the runner, when they first start out, they're also the ISA. You put on that hat, you play that ISA role when you're on the phone converting those leads, whether they're coming from your database, whether they're doing outbound prospecting, whether they're inbound leads. You're the ISA. That's the ISA role that you're playing on your team. As you grow, as you add leverage to your organization, ISA is one of those roles. When you grow enough, when you need someone to help you make those calls, set those appointments, help you convert those leads, that's the time you want to add an ISA into your organization, and we can have the most impact, right? So when we train folks to be an ISA, we bring them in, we always tell them there's two areas we want to focus on, right? One is the outbound cold calling. That is one specific type of project, and it's in my opinion, it's a specific kind of skill set that you need to be successful in that space. And there's another kind of role, which is the inbound lead nurturing, appointment setting role, and then talking about leads coming from online. And that can be Facebook, Google, the portals, Zillow.com, Realtor.com, those kind of leads. Like I mentioned, skills, right? It's a different kind of skill set. It's a different kind of a call. So those are the two main areas that we focus on. And when we bring people into the company, that's one of the first things we teach them. You're going to be doing one of these two roles. And we're going to try and segment their skill sets and personalities to the one that they can do the best, right? Because it's a person that can actually do cold calling 4, 6, 7, 8 hours a day has a really specific set of skills. And one of them, the main one, is grit. They could be on the phone and they are just looking for that. They want blood, right? They're going for it. They're hunters and they're looking for the win. They're willing to take 99 no's to get to that first yes, because that's the only thing that matters to them and that they care about. And stamina, right? That's cold calling can be a really challenging job, but it works. People want it. People run those campaigns because they can be successful, right? So that is one of them. And the inbound one is a different kind of approach. It's more it's akin more to a customer service kind of a conversation you're having with folks. And you're trying to stand out, you're trying to add value, and you want to convert them, you want to qualify them and convert them, right? Either on the first call, second call, third call, and a nurturing process. Kyle, I don't know if you do a lot of internet leads in your company, in your brokerage. It's a process, it's a grind, right? The most committed is going to win. It takes multiple touches to convert these leads. ISAs come in to help with that. Some teams manage this with the agents. Some teams have an ISA supporting the agents on the back end. Some teams have teams of ISAs that hand off only the hottest, the warmest, the most motivated leads go to the agents. Everything else goes to the ISAs. So we prepare folks for both of those roles. At the end of the day, in either of those roles, it is about rapport building. It is about having a good conversation with folks. And I always tell the ISAs, one of the pillars of training them is to understand that this role, you're going to be successful in this role if you can demonstrate a couple of things. Number one is empathy, right? And the second one is curiosity. Empathy and curiosity. And that it's a difficult skill to teach, but it is teachable. It is a skill you can build. It takes practice. But if you're curious about a conversation you're having with someone, you're always going to ask, well, why is that? Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. Oh, that's it. That's cool. That's great. I want to know more about your move from, you're moving from California to Denver. Oh, great. What's the reason for that? What's driving you to the area? Okay, that's awesome. Or they might be thinking of, moving up or moving down. They might have a home to sell, but they're not going to share that with you if you have no interest in them, right? The leads. It's not as easy as this was only a few years ago. Leads are not going to go out and tell you, help me out. They're not. There's multiple agents talking to them, multiple agents courting them, right? You've got to have as high quality a conversation as you can so they can maybe, show you their cards a little bit, give you a little bit more information, build that rapport, build that trust, and ask the right questions and get higher quality answers. I think that's where like a well-trained ISA can really move the needle for teams.
I love that you differentiated, and I think it's a really important differentiation when you've got people that are nurturing, and I think of like the gatherer, and then you said hunter on the people who are making cold calls, because it is really that setup. You've got someone that's kind of tending the garden, tending the farm, like, hey, come on in. I'm going to give you a lot of hospitality, going to give you a lot of customer service, still sales oriented, but maybe a softer approach on those internet leads. And then on cold calls, you absolutely get right to the point, have a script, be like resilient, like you were saying. And that's actually how I built my entire career, is making cold calls in the investment real estate space. And it's really interesting. I'll pull this up at some point. It'll resonate with you, but I don't get a lot of DMs, believe it or not. And that's not an invitation to send me a lot of DMs through Instagram.
Right now.
I actually got made fun of the other day. This is just a fun little side note. We had our first company happy hour in like a year, just because of the pandemic, and things are starting to open up here in Colorado. And someone had made the comment about people kind of like sliding into your DMs. I'm like, what is that? What does that mean? And they're like, are you serious? You've never heard that? I'm like, no, I've been married for 16 years. I got 3 kids that are in elementary school. Like, DMing is the last thing I think about. I got too much email to deal with, so it's just funny. But I built my career by hustling, making consistent outbound prospecting phone calls. And I think if you term them as prospecting phone calls, it maybe feels a little less cold. It feels a little bit more intentional. What we have learned is that that's the best way to build a geographic farm. There's tons of other ways to do it. They may be a little bit more passive, but I've found the most effective way to be on the phone, be in a discussion with someone, and do it with regularity around a certain type of product. So I'm a big believer in making, whether you call it cold calls or prospecting. And it is very different than having that inbound, someone's reaching out to you and what you say. So I've got to imagine that your systems, your process, you've probably dialed this down to personality types, I would imagine. Do you have any personality types or profiles that you like to use as you're actually hiring people for these roles?
So great question, Kyle. So I'm probably going to give an answer you're not going to expect, but we definitely, I know the personality profiles. We've used them. We have found that they're definitely factor in. It's important, right? If someone, the cold calling, outbound prospecting ISA tends to be the high D for sure. But you would be surprised the amount of high S and high C. We're talking about DISC, right? The color wheel, this profile. The high S and high C, the more introverted, not the high raging personality, you'd be surprised how many of those can be successful at that. It doesn't come naturally to them. It's more effort for them, for sure. It's harder for them to do, but they don't quit, right? They're consistent, they're methodical at it, and then they get better and they're learning based and they can be more coachable. So one of the things that we do is we've stopped actually doing personality assessments for the ISA role, and we give preference to performance. Like, who is teachable, who is coachable, and what are your numbers at the end of the day? We are a numbers-based organization, a performance-based organization. And I found that the personality profile, if used improperly, if not used the right way, could taint that result. It would make people point at that. And even the people that author those tools, they tell you it's 20% of the decision, 30% of the decision, right? That is what what their personality is like, what they're most comfortable with, and what they're going to gravitate towards naturally. We've just found that in this role, that's not the most important factor. Your values, your work ethic, and your grit. Very difficult to interview for that. Very difficult to find that out without putting you in a room with the phone and hit it and let's see what you did at the end of the week, right? That is the only way we've found to really measure those intangible parts of the ISA role.
I can remember how numbers were incredibly important to developing my own career as I was a young broker 15 years ago, 16 years ago with my senior broker, where if I was ever frustrated with what my results were, it would always come back to, okay, how many calls did you make? Out of those calls, how many actual conversations did you have? Out of those conversations, how many were quality conversations? And this is a contact sport. Did you set up a meeting? And it would just kind of be that simple 4-step process. That was sort of our humble way of describing it. Does it look like that to you, Gus? And then what are the metrics out of calls to contacts to appointments as you kind of go down that funnel? What have you seen kind of the ratios or the metrics for someone to have success in your organization?
Yeah, so I love that I'm on this show because I absolutely love what you just said, because that's exactly how we do it, Kyle. It's like almost down to the word, right? Whenever we have a campaign that's not performing and I say that might not be meeting expectations, those are the first questions that we ask. How many dials were made? That's going to tell you a lot right off the bat, right? How many dials were made? How many contacts were made? That's going to tell you more information. It might be telling you about the lead source. How many is it a solid lead source or not? How many conversations can we have? We know that for outbound prospecting, if we're not having 50, 60, 70 conversations a day, it's going to be hard to see results, even in a 90-day period, right? And then how many, like you said, quality conversations and conversions. I mean, for me, we kind of put those together. How many conversions did you have? You can have 100 conversations and no conversions. Those are either very low quality conversations or your skill set is not there to identify that. You're talking to enough people, especially if it's a true like a farming activity. If you're having 100 conversations, you should have multiple conversions of that, right? So I think all of those kind of tell you, is it a work ethic issue? They're not making enough calls. Is it a list issue? Their calls are being made. You're not calling anybody. It's become a bigger issue now than in the last few years. The contact rates are going down for these lists and for these activities. That's almost like a normal part of the process. And we're always trying to figure out ways to bump it up, right? And the third one is, are you talking to enough people, but you're not converting? That's an ISA issue. It's usually a training issue. And with anyone on the team, people go up in their performance, they go down in their performance, and we have to have these conversations on a continuous basis to bring people back up and hold them accountable to the goals, to the performance. So absolutely, and that's how we handle all of the lead sources, whether it's a farming, cold, outbound prospecting activity, or a Zillow, Facebook kind of campaign. The same conversation happens, right? Because the lead flow tends to be sort of consistent. Okay, what are your activities being consistent? If you have a database you're calling, how many calls did you make to that database? The conversion rates change, like you said. If we're talking about like true farming, sort of prospecting, you might have to maybe using some automation, making 300, 500 to 1,000 dials to get to those 50 conversations. In some markets, you have to make 1,000 dials to have 50 conversations. The contact rate can be so low. But you want to have that 50 conversations to one qualified seller lead, maybe up to 100 conversations to have that one qualified seller lead. That's where you want to be. And then it just depends. How many dials does it take to get the conversations? How many conversations is it going to take to get that converted lead? And that's kind of where the magic happens, right? If I had one formula I could use everywhere, I would. It's different in Southern California. It's very different in Denver. versus an Austin, Texas, versus a Miami, Florida, versus an Atlanta, Georgia. Those are really hot markets, but they're very different. They're very different, right? So all of these things kind of play in. Facebook side, I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum, the portal leads, the Facebook leads. If I'm talking to a lead from a Zillow.com, from a Realtor.com, I expect if I talk to 2 of those leads, I have the opportunity to convert at least one of them. If I talk to 3 of those leads, maybe I have an opportunity to convert a qualified lead out of every 3 of those that I receive. Not even the conversation. Let me talk about 3 received leads. One of those better be really good, because those lead sources tend to be people that are further down in the funnel. And this can vary by market, but that's the difference. It's a big difference. And those leads obviously are priced accordingly, right? To that difference in location. So, you know, and I've known folks that have built their business on one versus the other. I mean, they can both work. It's got to be, you have to know your numbers at the end of the day. And I always, you know, it's a challenge for folks. I understand it. I get it. But if you really want to scale up a business, want to be successful, you've got to know your numbers. You got to know your numbers. How much, and then you know, take it to the next level. And you know, how much did you spend on these leads? Actually, I've done this with clients that I do consulting or coaching with. I'm like, okay, great. You know, because they have maybe 4 or 5 lead sources, and they've got Facebook that they do, and they Facebook that they buy from a company, and they've got Google leads, and they've got Zillow and Trulia, and they had not. And this is actually a very large team out of Utah, great company, great team. They had not gone through the exercise of the cost per acquisition of these leads. Cost per acquisition. How much did those deals cost? And when they went through, like, holy cow, right? They had kind of grouped everything as Facebook, and their organic Facebook was costing about $500. Not organic. The in-house done Facebook was costing about $500 a deal, right? $500 a deal. And the Facebook leads that they bought from another company, it was $1,500 per deal, per transaction closed. Like, would you pay $500 for a transaction? Well, every day of the week is what I would do for, you know, if I could pay $500 and get a transaction at the other end. So those things are important, and it's the same kind of process.